Out of closed session. We have one item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion for the council reporting out of closed session is that council closed session report CS 24-019 be received, and that the town solicitor, with the assistance of an external lawyer, be directed to apply to the courts for an order restraining the contravention of the town's zoning bylaw in regard to the use of 95 Dunning Avenue.
Someone to move that? Councilor Reese, seconder. Councilor Gallo. Comments, questions? Record a vote.
Recorded vote has been requested for the only item of council reporting out of closed session this evening. Councilor Gardner, how do you vote? Councilor Gardner votes yes. Councilor Thompson? Councilor Thompson votes yes. Mayor Mrakas?
Yes.
Councilor Gallo? Councilor Gallo votes yes. Councilor Weiss? Councilor Weiss votes yes. Councilor Kim? Councilor Kim votes yes. Councilor Gilland was absent. The motion carries.
Q, confirming bylaw. Councilor Gallo, Councilor Kim, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Kim, Councilor Gardner, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Mr. Clerk, time is 7:01. I'm going to call this committee of the whole meeting to order. Town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. A shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. Council, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councilor Thompson, Councilor Kim, comments, questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Community presentations, we have two. Are soccer people outside or are they inside? Can we open the doors and have them come in because they're the first presentation? Or we can start with Mandy. Well, we can have them come in first and we'll start with Mandy. How's that? Well, all right. Teenage boys, gotta love them, eh? Well, no, I'll just get you guys to stand around. We'll get you guys to come in the middle and. Well, actually, if you want, come in the middle. Save us some time. Come in the middle. Come in the middle, boys. So you can turn around. You don't have to face me. Don't worry. I'll allow it this time. You can turn around and face the crowd while I talk. Don't worry. All right. So everyone, I'd like to welcome the coaching team, parents, and the U15 OPDL Gary Miller Shields champions to this evening's meeting. Now, the Aurora 2008 OPDL boys team's journey began from their core group having played together since U8, with new teammates joining along the way and acquiring new coaches, including their head coach, Johnny Borsellino. Coaches Johnny and Dan significantly impacted the team's performance, motivating their players to improve their skills, build strong team dynamics, and ultimately achieve their goals. With the same guidance from Roy and Bill, the coaching staff, including the technical directors, Dave, Marco, keeper coach Don, and fitness coach Dr. Milad, they honed player skills, instilled discipline, perseverance, teamwork, values, and helped them overcome initial struggles. Now, despite defeats, the team remained together. Their manager, Marcel, fostered camaraderie, emphasizing the importance of unity and keeping their bond strong. The team's cohesion and resilience was instrumental in their remarkable journey, and they were able to beat the odds, securing their well-deserved win at the 2023 Gary Miller Charity Shield to become the U15 boys champions in a penalty shootout after a scoreless match. So, gentlemen, congratulations on a job well done. Champions. So I have a little something. I'm going to come to the center. Roy, if you can help me, maybe some of the coaches, we're going to hand out these pins to them and then we'll do a photo. Okay, council next. You want me to receive presentation, Mr. Clerk? Yeah, motion to receive that presentation. Councillor Gallo, Councillor Thompson, all those in favor? Opposed, that carries. 5.2, Mandy, Cronin, you can play regarding You Can Play partnership. Mandy, welcome. Good to see you again. Yeah, so I'll get you to come up and floor is yours.
I apologize. I'm going to read off this just so I adhere to your timing here. So, good evening, council members, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with all of you today. My name is Mandy Cronin. I'm the head of partnerships for the You Can Play project, or as we are known most widely as You Can Play. We deeply appreciate the relationship with all of you and the town of Aurora. With our participation in last week's Pride Luau, we have already been able to experience the amazing work that you're doing in the community here. At that event, it was a pleasure to meet several staff members, chat with the mayor about his priorities, and to work with Haley Jones, who's made this entire relationship possible. You Can Play, if you're unfamiliar, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating and advancing safety and inclusion in sports from the pro and national levels down to the playground levels. We were founded almost 12 years ago by passionate folks who knew that sport could do better. You may know one of our co-founders, former Toronto Maple Leafs president and general manager, Brian Burke. Over the years, we have been fortunate to have the support of our sport and corporate partners such as Canadian Tire, Scotiabank, the NHL, the Canadian Olympic Committee, and even the PGA, the USTA, Major League Soccer, just to name a few. Today, I briefly wanted to share a bit about the impactful work we do and speak to you about how excited we are to partner with the town of Aurora to foster safe and inclusive sporting and activity environments for the 2S LGBTQ+ community within Aurora. Here's a few of the ways we will be teaming up with the town. First, our comprehensive staff training sessions. We recognize that creating inclusive sport starts with the basics, education. We conduct interactive and scenario-based training sessions for coaches, sports administrators, and staff members like yourselves. These sessions go beyond basic awareness. They empower participants with practical tools, terminology, and sport-proven tactics to build inclusion. By equipping coaches, referees, admins, and families with the knowledge to challenge biases and stereotypes, we promote a culture that benefits everyone involved in sports. We especially look forward to running some sessions with council and other town officials, and we know you will enjoy these because we are known for our fun and engaging sessions since we're all athletes. Next, evaluation and examination of policies. Next, we engage with organizations to evaluate and examine their policies through an inclusive lens. Our experts help organizations identify areas where policies can be enhanced to better support the 2S LGBTQ+ participants. Much like your work to implement quality legislation as a council, we find laying the solid foundation of policy ensures that the work is sticky and every athlete has equitable opportunities to participate and succeed. From here, we provide enhanced support for local sporting organizations. With some education in place and our policies codified, we work with the town and community organizations to implement inclusive practices through events and engagement opportunities. From mentorship programs to visibility events, we empower these organizations to create welcoming spaces where 2S LGBTQ+ individuals can participate without fear of discrimination. Lastly, we deliver education sessions to increase awareness. We like to spread the education far and wide, as inclusion practices are drastically more impactful when we all row in the same direction. When parents, coaches, referees, administrators, athletes, and fans all understand the goal, inclusion becomes all of our issue and not just something we think about at the end of a meeting. Our You Can Play team looks forward to working with Haley and her team to bring this education to bear across the town's programs and into the hands of those who work with athletes. Although parades and Pride months are wonderful, this is still about that child's first experience in sport and being welcome when they arrive at that very first practice. If we get that right, the chances of them staying in sport drastically improve, as well as their physical and mental health outcomes. In conclusion, You Can Play remains steadfast in our commitment to championing inclusivity and equality in sports. By working collaboratively with the council and local communities, we can create enduring change that ensures every athlete, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, can thrive in their sporting pursuits. Thank you, councillors, for your consideration in this work and supporting Haley, the mayor, and these initiatives, and partnering with You Can Play to build a future where diversity is celebrated and inclusion is the norm in sports. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Mandy. Council, can I get a motion to receive the presentation? Councilor Gardner, Councillor Kim, any questions? Councillor Weiss.
Yeah, thank you, Mandy. It was very interesting. Just a couple of questions, though. Are you a foundation or are you a program deliverer? Meaning, do you distribute money to organizations? Okay, you get money from those sponsors that you had before, and then you run programs of inclusion in the communities.
Mandy? Yeah, Mandy, go ahead.
And our partners help us amplify that. That's how we get it out. Those partners that we mentioned, they provide the support to us financially and they help us amplify our message.
Super. And through you, do you have any specific targets for our community, knowing that we have, we have a rather diverse community? Have you worked on targeting any particular populations that that you have in your sights for the programs that you're going to deliver?
The general to us LGBTQ plus community.
Okay.
That's it. And we are at the very beginnings of this relationship. So yeah, we're just getting started.
And do you need any connections with any of those local communities, or are you, as Haley and the staff directed you into that?
As I said, we are just getting started, so I'm sure we will get to that point.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
We'll take any connections you want to give us.
Thanks.
We just want to have the widest impact we can have possible.
Thanks and welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Gardner.
I thank you for coming and giving us this information. And thank you for doing this important work.
Present this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none. Mandy, thank you very much for coming. I'm actually pretty excited to sit down and go through some sessions with council, to learn some more. And we're always striving to become a even more inclusive community. And so we appreciate what you're doing. And I couldn't be prouder than us kind of leading the way from a municipal standpoint and working with You Can Play to develop an extraordinary standard that makes our community one of the most diverse and inclusive communities out there. So thank you for the work. And I'm looking forward to many more conversations about how we move forward.
In Canada to do this with us. That's huge. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Delegations. We have 6.1, Trish Lear, resident, regarding 65 St. John Sideroad zoning bylaw. Trish, welcome. Just remind you have 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council and the public. My name is Trish Lear. I'm a resident of Ward 1, which is proud to house within its borders the Mackenzie Marsh. Last week, I listened in on the OLT CMC, and it came clear that many members of the Aurora Town Council had altered their decision from the January 23rd planning meeting, and the town is now in discussion with the developers of 65 St. John Sideroad. I'd like to take the opportunity this evening to remind the council that this is not just a Ward 1 concern. This is a town of Aurora community concern. Our petition to save the Mackenzie Marsh by stopping the planned development and upholding the zoning bylaw for 65 St. John Sideroad as a single dwelling property is now over 2,500 signatures. This shows sentiment across Aurora that we must do everything that we can to protect our natural heritage and the environment. Supporting me today in chambers are members of the public across all wards, not just Ward 1. Once again, demonstrating that the community as a whole is concerned for the safety of the marsh. On January 23rd, Councillor Kim said, "The marsh is part of our identity. Any amount of road salt or garbage leaching into the marsh is a danger. The huge amount of fill coming into the area is a risk. The risk concerns go on and go on when it comes to the marshland. As a result, the risk reward of construction of this magnitude on this land is too high. I'm all for intensification, but not at this location." On January the 23rd, Councillor Thompson said, "There's not much left for me to be said. You know, many reasons have been cited tonight why this is not an acceptable proposal, and I share those concerns. I share the comments of the Mayor and Councillor Kim. I think the only one point that I will echo that has been said repeatedly tonight is that the marsh is a valued community asset, and any risk to that is not acceptable. I'm sure the councillors who altered their vote could argue further information has come to light, and you're now satisfied a compromise can be found. Information submitted by the developers is often accepted at face value and is not scrutinized and fully validated. It's often void of fact. This was demonstrated on the January 23rd meeting, and I'll remind you that it was reflected in all of your comments supporting any risk to this wetland is too risky. Any risk. I want to highlight the term used by multiple councillors at the January 23rd meeting. Any risk. By allowing any other development other than what the property is currently zoned for, a single dwelling home, places the marsh at risk. So I appeal to all of you to reconsider your entertainment of any alternative proposals. Stand up for the town of Aurora and our community at OLT. Get external counsel and help your Aurora community fight for what I know you know is right. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have two questions. First, where do we go from here? And secondly, how can we ensure that this decision will not be made behind closed doors by a select few without the opportunity to align with the sentiment of the Aurora community? Mr. Mayor, if there is any good time to use your strong mayoral powers to ensure we uphold the zoning bylaw for 65 St. John's Sideroad, I believe this would be the time. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to receive the delegation? Councillor Gardner, Councillor Weiss, go ahead.
Thanks. I want to thank you, Mrs. Lear, for coming here today and for the work that you've done in the past. Just a little bit of context. Just how long has your Ratepayers Association, how long has it been operating now?
Trish?
Sorry.
We formed the Ratepayers Association in, it was in February of 2024, so about 4 months.
Great. And and have you had luck in attracting people to the Ratepayers Association?
Yes, we do. We've got approximately a membership of around 60.
60? Okay, thanks. I support what you're doing, and I know it's important to all of you. But looking beyond Aurora, you said you had 2,500 petitioners. Do you have an idea of how many of those are Aurora versus outside of Aurora versus Canada-wide, for instance?
Petitioners or the people who have signed the petition are Aurorans. We do have a lot in our surrounding areas that obviously enjoy the marsh. And we have a lot Canada-wide and Ontario-wide. And we even have some international signatures on the docket. They see Aurora and the marsh as a destination to come to, which I would say is something that I would hope that everybody keeps in mind, that not only is it a benefit to the environment to ensure that we protect this marsh, but it also assists with ensuring that we attract people to our town of Aurora and get them to go to local businesses and help us keep this a prosperous community.
Great.
Councillor?
Thank you. So let me just say again, thank you and your husband, Cronin, for the work that you've done, leadership and pulling the Ratepayers Association together. I think they're very important for resident advocacy. So thanks very much for your delegation tonight and for the work that you do.
Councillor Gallo?
Thank you. And I appreciate you all coming and expressing your views. You may recall I was the only one who voted against killing the application. And one of the reasons was for this very reason, that I hope I communicated that I foresaw this happening, and that at a minimum, it should have gone to another public planning meeting so that all of you would have been very clear on what every one of us had to say about the application. And that was denied. And the course of action was such that we made decisions behind closed doors because that's the way the process is, because it was denied when it came here. It's unfortunate. I don't think that was the right choice. Whether we agree or not with his application, that was not the right path for the public to fully understand how we feel about the application. And it's disappointing. I can't speak much about obviously the details until they're fully disclosed, which probably won't be that much longer. And then as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy to meet with anyone and explain how I voted and why I voted the way I did.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. 2,500 signatures is a lot of signatures. And you said there was interest outside of Aurora, but would you say that the majority of those signatures were from people in Aurora who not only in that one ward that holds the marsh, but expressed interest throughout the town or a good part of the town?
Majority of the signatures are throughout Aurora, and you can see representation this evening from not only Ward 1, as I mentioned, we have representation from the majority of the wards in the town of Aurora. So it is not just a Ward 1 issue or a sentiment.
Thank you. And I think it is important to the town. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none. Trish, thank you very much for coming out this evening. Everyone, thank you very much for coming out this evening. I'll just say one thing, that public planning meeting, it was the right decision. It was an unacceptable application in my mind. And as the vote was at council at that day, it was unacceptable. The process is the process at this point in time. We're at the tribunal, but as I've stated a couple of times, when we're able to, I'm sure all of us will make sure that all of you are well aware of what each one of our thoughts were and the decisions that we make as a council in your best interest. So we will make that known when the time comes and we're allowed to legally. So thank you very much for coming this evening. Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. You guys are more than happy to stay the rest of the evening and watch us. Council, move to the advisory committee meeting minutes. Someone want to move those? Councillor Reese, seconder. Councillor Kim. Any comments, questions on those ones? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. So we'll move into the agenda. Any items that anyone wants pulled? Councillor Gardner.
As always, Mr. Mayor, all of them.
You want to pull all of them? Okay, we'll start with 9.1, community reflection space. Councillor Gardner, you pulled this one. You want to move it as is? Pardon? Yes, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Gallo, thank you. Councillor Gardner, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank staff for the report. I think we needed to do more work on this than we had information last time. And I was always in support of the town hall for various reasons, like washroom facilities, etc. But we don't have a figure on the cost of this. I know that we're going to have to, it's going to have to be explored, but does somebody have an idea of Ms. Keel is here, or perhaps Mr. Minow?
Ms. McDougall?
Or Ms. McDougall?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this time, there are funds as a placeholder in the capital budget of 250,000. We do know that there are other works to be done here at Town Hall with the parking lot area what we want to do is try to coordinate those efforts with the timing of design and implementation for this, so it streamlines. That being said, the goal here is noted in the recommendation number 3 is we would proceed with the design and come back to council once we know closer to what that budget would be for this specific work on this reflection space.
Councillor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and that seems like quite a lot of money to me. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to come in with a lower budget than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Weiss?
Yes, thank you. The other thing that I'd like to ask is the selection of town hall. And I've heard it's because close to washrooms, et cetera. But when you look at the matrix, it clearly shows that Queen's Diamond Jubilee Park was suggested by all of those, not all of them, most of them, and town hall is a second. So can you expand a little bit on the purpose of town hall and why it is better than Queen Diamond Jubilee Park, please? Through you, Mr. Mayor, to, I guess, Michelle.
Ms. Johnson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Weiss. The one overarching benefit of town hall that we discovered is that there isn't as much of a competing purpose. A lot of the other spaces that we were looking at were established parks with histories of use and patterns of use, including recreational, sporting activity, and the mandate of the reflection space and the tone that we would set would be in conflict with some of those existing uses. Queen's Diamond Jubilee was a bit of an exception because of the geography of the space. It is a bit more separated. So it was easier to redefine that eastern portion, but that is what prompted us to land primarily on town hall.
Councillor?
Yes, and through you, I've noticed the various groups. You have Oasis Bereavement. Were the Indigenous community involved in this as well? Because I don't see anything specific about our Indigenous community.
Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Weiss. This idea really came from our Indigenous Relations Committee. So it was talked about in January of 2023 with our Anishinaabe consultant, grandmother Kim Wheatley. She brought up that we were really lacking a space that was conducive to public expression of these sentiments as it related to truth and reconciliation. So from that meeting, an interdepartment group of staff kind of went away and thought about it and presented some options to the committee and to Kim. And at that point, the decision was made to expand the scope. So instead of it just relating to truth and reconciliation, of course, that's included. It could also include other instances that evoke similar sentiments. So the genesis of this really came from the Indigenous Relations Committee and from Kim herself.
Councillor?
So I guess the outcome is that you're very happy with the sample size and with the information that you came in, and you're satisfied that town hall is the best place for this, considering all the other input that you've had.
Yes.
Okay.
Through you, sorry, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Weiss. Yes, that would be the result. Although, as stated in one of the points in the report, there are some considerations with town hall as well. There's some things to take into consideration with it being the municipal headquarters, but we do believe it is the right location. Yes.
Councillor?
You just answered my last question. Thanks. Okay.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you. Through to Ms. Johnson. Similar question, not so much about the selection of town hall, but the location within town hall that you're proposing at the front. Because on page 6, when you talk about site selection, you talk about you looking for a place that provides a level of privacy, a secluded space. And so I'm just wondering, I guess, why we chose the location out at the front by the road as opposed to any other location on the property, and were other ones considered, and if so, which ones?
Ms. Johnson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Thompson. That area at Town Hall has an interesting synergy with what the reflection space will be. It was originally started and that tree was planted by an internal staff group. I believe it's called Town of Aurora Staff Together, short form is TOAST, as sort of a calm space to kind of go, and I think if people were experiencing hardship, there was some past experiences that were like that happened there. So it was brought up at the Indigenous Relations Committee meeting as a location that may be able to be refurbished for this purpose. I think also it's connectivity. So it is very close to accessible parking, to transit, to the parking lots, and it does offer some oversight while feeling a bit out of the way and not in the middle of something else that's happening, being towards the eastern end.
Councillor.
Thank you. And we often have conversations around the Petch House. Was there any thought about utilizing the Petch House as perhaps that space as well?
Johnson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Thompson, no,
Okay.
we didn't talk about pet shops.
Councillor.
That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Johnson, for the report. As chair of the Accessibility and Advisory Committee, we thought that the Queen Julie Park and Town Hall being accessible were the two options that were most viable. So I'm partial to both. But was there any thought, or did you consult with, through you, Mr. Mayor, did you consult with the local residents of each of the prospective locations as to their thoughts on having the reflection space in their neighborhood?
Ms. Johnson.
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Kim, not directly ward by ward. Some of that did come through in the Engage Aurora consultation. Some people who responded, I mentioned what neighborhood they were in and how they felt about any development in that neighborhood, either for or against a reflection space. So there was some information received through Engage Aurora, but we didn't do an expanded consultation on those specific areas directly to the residents at this point.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Council, if there's no objections, I'm going to bring 14.5 forward next because there are some members in the audience that are here. So just to get them, so they're not sitting too long. So I'm going to bring 14.5 forward. Councillor Gardner, you pulled this one. Do you want to move it? Does anyone want to move it? This is 180, 182 Center Street, site plan application. Councillor Gallo, thank you. Councillor Thompson, seconder. Councillor Gardner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's a lot of things that concern me. One of them is we were talking about it's consistent with the Aurora Promenade. But I don't think the Aurora Promenade considered having an entrance to a building like this on Industrial Parkway. A very busy street. I think that the setback for such a high building, the setback at the first story may make the building look overpowering. I'm not sure that we have left enough room to ensure that trees flourish for the borders of this property. I don't understand. It says in here something about not having parking and providing parking. Through you to Mr. Ramuno.
Mr. Ramuno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in the table where we compare the zoning standards, the proposal is it's 193 units. They are providing 2 levels of underground spaces for a total of 252 spaces. But as per the recent Bill 185 that the province approved a little while ago, this is within a major transit station area, and we are no longer required, municipalities are no longer allowed to require minimum parking standards. Having said that, the zoning bylaw can include a minimum parking standard, but the applicant can certainly propose a certain number of parking spaces. And in this instance, they're proposing more than 1 space per unit.
Councillor.
Thank you. And if I remember correctly, a motion from the mayor was passed by council that we would be decreasing the parking standards in the major transit area. So I'm not sure why we have this parking. Also, and the consultant many years ago at this point answered my question. The major transit areas, that's one of the best places where we can have some affordable housing or low-cost housing because people don't need cars and can assess the transportation system there. I don't see anything related to that in this application, and it is, of course, very close to the GO station.
Mr. Romano?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's within the major transit station area, so it is a perfect location for the this type of development. Again, the 7-story build form aligns with our new official plan. The applicant is working with staff through a related site plan application, and they are proposing a mix of a variety of unit sizes from studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, in hopes of meeting our the affordability targets as best they can. So there is a range of unit sizes, smaller unit sizes as well in this location for more affordable units.
Councillor?
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, I'm going to go to the chart on page 6. So the front yard setback, so that is the setback on Industrial Parkway. We are considering that the front of the building through you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Councillor?
So the way I look at this, the apartments that are at the front are practically on Industrial Parkway, and I don't like that at all. The fact that the amenity area has been decreased by so much, the purpose of amenity area is to have a place where people who live in the building can gather for social functions, to celebrate a birthday, whatever, especially if we're having such dense living situation here. So it's gone from 50% has to be inside to 15%, a minimum of 15%. And, they're including, as always, balconies and in the amenity area space, but amenity area's intention is not for an individual unit. It is for the collective use of the building. So I'm very opposed to that. Dwelling adjacent, on page 7, dwelling adjacent to an employment zone. It's supposed to be 20 meters, and they are suggesting 3 meters. That's barely large enough to put viable trees on. Now, could you just clarify the parking standards? It says in the chart, 0 parking spaces in visitor parking. So you said that wasn't happening?
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So as per the recent provincial legislation within this area being a major transit station area, municipal zoning bylaws cannot mandate a minimum amount of parking spaces. So we're not including that in the parent zoning bylaw. However, the applicant in this instance is providing for 252 parking spaces on site.
Okay, so the fact is that in the chart, they don't have to 0, but they're going to. I think there might be a mistake on page 8 at the very bottom, the last sentence. Enter into a development agreement with the town to ensure the building will be constructed in accordance with the town's development standards. I think that it should be the town's green development standards. I mean, it's a given, it has to be in conjunction with the town's development standards, but I think the word green is missing there. Through Mr. Mayor, is that correct?
Mr. Romano?
Through Mr. Mayor, I mean, it's a general statement in accordance with all our development standards. And yes, that would be green development standards, our zoning bylaw, as identified in this draft zoning bylaw and other town regulations. So yes, it's generic development standards, obviously including our green development standards.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just found that a little strange because of course they would have to be in compliance with our development standards. So I thought maybe the word green was meant to be in there. Again, on page, or maybe somebody else wants to weigh in before I continue. Do I have any seconds? I only have 15 seconds. I'll wait, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Reese?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions. It said in the report, but it hasn't been said in public yet. This is somewhat unique in that this is going to remain as apartment building. It came to us originally as apartment building, and so the application is to maintain it as an apartment building.
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council Weiss, I think you may mean, apartment building built form, but the tenure, I think earlier on, there was discussion with the owner about it being a purpose-built rental building, as opposed to perhaps a market condo building.
Correct.
And so again, we can't necessarily enforce whether the tenure of the building, whether it's a condo or a purpose-built rental, but the owner is still working through his plans with respect to whether it's going to be a purpose-built rental. So he's still seriously considering that.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mayor, again, I don't see any comments here about residents. Now, I realize that 3/4 or 3 sides of this is mainly commercial and industrial. But when you get down to the back end and you're looking at Center Street and then over on Cedar and the rest of those areas there, off of Walton, has there been any resident activity in terms of asking residents to comment on the development? Through you to Mr. Romano.
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly, and if I can refer you to page 13, that is where we identified the public comments that we received in that chart at the first public planning meeting. So there were people in attendance, and I think we received things in writing. So there are just essentially those 3 or 4 general themes of comments that we heard from residents.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No more.
Councillor Gallo?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, do we know, or do you know when I realize we no longer approve site plans. It's delegated authority to staff, but do we know roughly when that will be completed?
Mr. Romano?
Through Mr. Mayor, so staff, we have the site plan staff. We're working through that with other departments and agencies. So we should probably have that finalized over the next number of weeks. I think 4 to 6 weeks.
Councillor?
Okay. Just being the ward councillor, I wouldn't mind if you could take some time to go through it with me whenever you feel it's near completion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Gardner, second time.
Thank you. I am concerned at the closeness of the front of the building to Industrial Parkway North. It says on page 10, the Aurora Promenade concept plan, urban design strategy advocates for building closer to the street and enhancing public spaces. And it goes on to say that the proposed building aligns with this. Being strategically located on Industrial Parkway North to enliven the streetscape. This was not what was envisioned by the Promenade plan. So I have to object to that. And I think being so close to industrial, a street that has a lot of truck traffic, because I take that street a lot, and they're going up to the various industrial commercial facilities farther along on Industrial Parkway. I think it's so unfair to the future residents who aren't here to speak to us about this, but 3 meters is, I don't know how many feet, maybe 5, 10, 3 meters is 10 feet. And then there will be balconies. So these people will be just basically sitting on Industrial Parkway with all the noise and the fumes. And I think it's too close. I think it should be moved farther back. And I think, you know, if you're talking about situating a building closer to the street to animate the streetscape and create a friendly pedestrian design, I don't think, again, that this was envisioned for industrial north. Back to the amenity area, we have winters. We are unsure what our winters are going to be like going forward, but we know that they can be entirely unfriendly. So not to have any significant amenity space inside where people can get together and even play cards or whatever, to me is really very short-sighted. These are our residents, these will be our residents, and we need to take care of them proactively. And that's all I've got, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Call a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, go back to 11.1. Updated corporate asset management plan. Presentation to be provided. Chris Vanderheyden, Director, Asset Management Advisory, PSD. Chris, welcome. And 14.1 is another presentation. So council, after this one and we vote on this one and we have discussion on this, I'm going to move to 14.1, which is the natural capital asset management plan, just so we continue through that similar discussion. Chris, floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. My name is Chris Vanderheyden, Director of Asset Management Advisory at PSD Citywide, Research Consulting Software and Asset Management. I've been with PSD Citywide for 8 years now, and I do come from a municipal government background, working for a large county in southwestern Ontario for a number of years, just for a little bit of context. So today we're going to be talking about the 2024 Asset Management Plan. The 2024 Asset Management Plan is in advance of the 2025 OREG compliance. So you're 1 day less or less than the OREG requirement for July 1st, 2025. So well in advance. Many municipalities are not at this stage today. Most haven't even completed the 2024 regulations, let alone 2025. So the next slide. Just quick breakdown. I'm not going to get into the details of the asset management plan. I'm sure everybody read the asset management plan in its entirety, but we will focus more on the proposed level of service and the financial strategy going forward. But as we can see here, the town of Aurora's total infrastructure replacement value has increased by an estimated $800 million since the last asset management plan. So from 1.5 billion to 2.3 billion today. That is equivalent to a 35% increase in replacement cost value across the entire asset portfolio. Next slide. If we look at the state of the infrastructure and the condition side of things, in comparison to the 2021 asset management plan, when there's 79% of all assets in the asset portfolio, we're at 79%, 78% of the assets were in fair or better condition. On the contrary, Jason and I were just talking about the report to council. There was some data work and new inventory assessment and information that came forward before we presented the asset management plan. So now the town's assets are at 85% fair or better condition. And that's to do with a lot of the inventory improvements that have been made, new asset data and assessed condition that has been applied to these assets. So not 74%, but it's actually increased to 85% fair or better condition. Next slide, please. If we looked at the forecasted capital requirements, the previous annual capital requirements in the 2021 asset management plan was 48.3 million. Although we see an increase of replacement value from 1.5 to 2.3 billion, the actual annual requirement today for this asset management plan is 43.8 million. So a decrease in the annual requirements, again, due to the extensive inventory analysis and all of the new data that has come forward on mainly core infrastructure. So in the past AMP, we relied on a combination of TCA data, historical data, and some also asset management data as well. What that really is equivalent to is slightly over $200 million over a 5-year period. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at categorical analysis of the tax funded assets. And really what this is a high level view. If we were to just say, we want to increase condition by 5%, maintain your assets at the current condition, or decrease condition to save some money, this is a high level analysis to show you what the differences are in the capital funding required. This is not indicative or not reflective of the proposed level of service that were defined in this asset management plan. This is simply for representation purposes only, just to give context. Next slide, please. So if we look at the rate funded assets in the same context, we'll see again, it's just an example. If we do increase, decrease, or maintain condition, what would that cost be to the municipality? Next slide, please. So this graph represents the target reinvestment rate requirements for the recommended proposed level of service, which are outlined within the asset management plan. And it's against the current reinvestment strategy that is employed with the town. So the current reinvestment strategy versus what is actually required based on the target levels of service that we have recommended. Next slide, please. So if we look at the financial analysis of tax funded assets, your assets, tax funded assets are currently funded at 40.4% of their long-term needs. So what I must say is long-term needs, we're not looking at 15 or 20 years. We're looking at the entirety from acquisition to disposal of every single asset in your inventory. So it's not just a short-term projection, it's a very long-term projection. The tax change required for full funding is 27.5%. which really equates to an increase in tax revenues by an additional 0.89% on top of the increase that you've already applied. And we have recommended a 15-year financial strategy to meet those requirements. Now, I must say, when we talk about tax increases, we can only include, in Ontario, the regulations only allow us to include sustainable funding sources. So we can't look at one-time grants. We can't look at unsustainable revenue streams when we develop these asset management plans. So if you put that into context, we know that there's grants that come forward from senior government grants, and you also have reserves, but it has to be a sustainable revenue source. So when we look at this, it's a prediction to say, if we want to be fully sustainable and not be dependent on any other revenue streams and only on our taxes and rates, this is what we're looking at. So please take that into consideration when you're looking at this plan. Next slide, please. If we look at the financial analysis of your water network, we actually found the rate change required for full funding is 32.9%, but it's a decrease by 0.28% to 1.92% from the previous recommended 2.2% increase. Again, due to the extensive data work and information that has come forward since the last asset management plan that the town of Aurora staff have presented for this asset management plan is due to these changes in these circumstances. And we once again recommend a 15-year financial recommendation at that 1.92% over 15 years. Next slide, please. Similarly, with the sanitary network, we're looking at recommended increase of sanitary rates by 1.27% from the current 0.4% increase over a 10-year term. Again, that's looking at the new information and data and condition assessments that have come forward to be able to determine this. And this is based on a 10-year plan going forward. Next slide. And for the storm network, we're actually looking at a significant decrease because and this is common through every municipality that we work with. Storm network inventories were the inventories that never had the information and data and the inventory to prove what we actually owned, what condition it was in, and what it's worth. So from the last asset management plan to today, with all the significant data work that has been done, we're looking at a rate change, or sorry, we need a 161.4% increase or tax rate change over time. Now that seems like it's very bad news, but if we look at the context from the last asset management plan to now, it's actually really good news considering. We're looking at a decreased rates by 6.08% to 4.92%. That's previously recommendation based on the information. The data was an 11% increase. So this is actually good news from all the hard work, from all the information and data that has come forward. And unlike the other asset categories, this is the only one with a 20-year strategy at 4.92% increase over time for every single year. So if we get into some of the recommendations from this asset management plan, asset inventory data review and validation. So I just reminded everyone there's been a significant amount of work that went into the inventory that we use for this asset management plan. A lot of engineering data, a lot of GIS data to actually prove what you own and how much you own. So this is similar to every other asset category. Continuous review and validation. Without validating your asset management inventory, your replacement costs, your plan is no longer dynamic. It has to be a living, breathing document, and the system actually provides that information in the reports and the outputs to be able to generate this analysis. Condition assessment strategies. Can't make this more important, and I have for many municipalities, a lack of assessed condition doesn't allow us to actually predict what your requirements are going in the future. We're solely basing it on age. So we look at an underground pipe. It may have an 80-year estimated useful life from a financial perspective, but we know we have assets in the ground that have their life cycles exceeded 100 years. Other assets have not even exceeded that 60 years. So investing in a formal condition assessment strategy for all assets is very important to get the best information and data forward. Lifecycle management strategies. Regularly evaluate your lifecycle management strategies at regular intervals for all assets, not just core assets. And acquire and apply current replacement values for all assets using industry standards and regional costs. Levels of service, again, just regular review of service level tracking strategies. And I apologize, there's a typo in this slide. There was an and in there and it shouldn't have been in there. So that's why it has changed slightly. Next slide, please. And next steps, 2030, Town of Aurora's next OREG compliant asset management plan. It must be developed with 2028 year-end data. Report on proposed levels of service annually. So once a year, council must revisit the asset management plan, review it. You look at your target levels of service and report on whether you're getting to those targets or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Council, someone want to move the recommendation? Councillor Weiss, second by Councillor Kim. Comments or questions? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I guess my first question, perhaps you can just spend a little bit of time going in a little bit more detail about why you're recommending, in some cases, a 15-year strategy versus a 20-year strategy and so forth for the different increases.
Yeah,
Chris?
so those recommendations were made through our financial analysts, our senior financial analysts at PSD Citywide. And it's basically looking at where are you going to apply the best strategy to lower your costs and also meet the targets that you want to, the targets that we need to be able to be sustainable in funding. I can't get into the details myself because I don't actually develop the financial strategies. That's that of the financial team.
Councillor.
Okay, I'll say that and direct it towards staff because I'd like to understand specifically when we were talking about the analysis of tax funded assets where we're proposing a 1.63 increase over a 15-year period as opposed to the 1.22 over 20 years. We need to understand that if we're going to impose a tax increase.
Mr. Mayor, Ivan Kessel. Remember, this is both the presentation and the report. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the factors to consider is as we ramp up to the requirements for the asset management plan, we'll be also ramping up towards those service levels. So the service levels that are defined in the plan require the total amount of funding that's been identified on an annual basis. But to get there, it's going to take time. Part of what we're looking at for our report and that will come forward in September is we're going to review this analysis even further that was provided by PSD Citywide and then look into a little bit more and make a recommendation to council how to meet these obligations. And we have some strategies that we can identify and looking at some of the future savings, some of the debt conversion strategies that we have, and then also any other opportunities that may come where we can do some better reserve analysis to manage this in the long term.
Councillor.
Thank you, but I'm still not clear. We say the infrastructure deficit in this particular instance is $14.9 million. And so we're saying that we can collect that money either over a 15 or 20-year horizon. What are the risks associated with doing it over 15 years versus 20 years? I know what the tax impact is based on what you're saying, but I'm not hearing, if we do it that we need to do it in 15 versus 20 because of these following reasons, nor do I see it in the report.
Ms. Mary Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the biggest risk is as we ramp up, the longer it takes for us to meet the service levels that are identified, because we won't have the funding sources available until that point. So we'll have to make choices about how we invest our asset management funds that will meet our targets best operationally. There are some risks that the longer it takes, that some assets could fail and may need higher value of maintenance, or they may need like a more in-depth asset rehabilitation the longer it takes.
Councillor.
Thank you. And that's some of the information that I'm looking for to understand why we're picking certain horizons versus the other. I guess then my other question through you to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel is you talked about the fact that choices need to be made. Did, as we went through this process, look at our next 10-year capital plan and say, we need to remove some of these items so that we can lower the costs associated with it, or are we leaving that for another stage?
Ms. Mary Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as we're going through our development of our 2025 10-year capital plan at this time, we are factoring in the information in the asset management plan. And as we do phase in, we are struggling with some investments in asset management that may be identified in the plan, but we can't do them as soon as we'd like because we wouldn't have the funds available. One of the things we do plan on doing is taking another look at the timing of how we come forward with this investment and how we phase it in over time. And that would be part of the report that we're planning for September and the recommendations of the increases that we put forward.
Councillor.
Thank you. And keeping along those lines in terms of, you talked about service levels and identifying certain projects. When I look at the plan itself, I mean, obviously the road network is one of our biggest costs. I think it was identified at $900 million. And certainly in terms of the report itself, it talks about the annual deficit for the amount of money that we allocate towards it and what we're actually spending. And so I guess, as part of we go through this process, though, are we going to take a look at the service levels we provide to our roads? And we've spoken about this in the past, and I had a chance to talk to Mr. Ramono earlier. Other municipalities have rehabilitation guidelines. They identify I think it's a pavement quality index number, and they look at it from various variables in terms of what type of road it is. But this is one way that we could look to be able to manage our assets and perhaps find other ways to kind of blunt the impact of this deficit, is to take further look at the standards that we've applied and whether or not we have the right number. So perhaps through you to Mr. Ramuno, whether there's some thought from the department to revisit some of these.
Mr. Ramuno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I don't have an answer for you here tonight, but we can certainly take it back and have further discussion with our finance staff. And
Councillor.
I guess at the end of the day, I mean, this is one of numerous items on the agenda tonight that are calling for budgetary impacts. And we have seen across the board, costs continue to escalate. And I don't think that just raising taxes should always be the first option. I think there needs to be other work that needs to be done to ensure that we're making every effort to try and minimize the impact to residents.
Thank you. Councillor Reese.
Yes, thank you. And I'm somewhere in the same direction as Councillor Thompson is on this. And the fourth bullet on the first page, the town's present funding strategy will not achieve the recommended capital asset levels of service. And I think you may have suggested that you were going to come back with a plan in order to manage this. But I noticed that in the past, you've also said the same kind of thing about our 10-year capital plan, and that's in jeopardy of being able to reach targets. And then I've seen water and wastewater warnings in various places that you provide us. When will we see all of this pulled together so that we can get a better view of where we are? Because I'm concerned about our spending patterns and the revenue side of it as well. So if you could give us a little understanding about where and when these plans are going to come forward that will affect the tax rate in particular, through you to Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in September, we're planning on bringing a report forward that will address the funding needs for this term of council. Our goal is to be able to meet what the requirements are in the asset management plan, but without increasing the tax levy from what was presented in the multi-year budget. And we think we have a path forward that we could present that will provide that option for council. At that point in time, we're going to have to turn our attention to do a bit more longer term look, how we handle that going forward after 2027. And we're looking at some other options and how we balance that overall.
Councillor.
Great. Let's look forward to it in September then. Thank you.
Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just getting my notes here. This could be to Mr. Vanderheiden or staff. In reading most of the documents, the report, we understand that the, AMP is a living document, and that's been reiterated many times. And there's many variables, including new assets coming online over the years, creating complexities. And it seems like it's more of an art form rather than a science. The total replacement cost from pre-COVID or 2021 went from $1.5 billion to $2.35 billion. And, that's a delta of 57%. I recall back in 2020, we had a GTA inflation of roughly 3.5%, 4%. Even with the doubling of inflation, that doesn't totally back up the numbers there. So the two variables that, I've read and I can think of that would account for this variance would be one, addition of new assets, or that our prediction of asset replacement and hence depreciation of assets were off. Are there other variables here that I haven't considered that can account for the 57% difference here? And a subsequent question to that is, what are some of the large assets that's been added over the last 3-4 years that may account for the delta here?
Cres.
Very good question. I would say a great deal attributed to obviously inflation, the cost of raw materials and so on, and updating the replacement costs, but also the work that's went into refining the inventory, getting a good handle on how much do we own of what. If we look at pipes underground, do we have a good handle on how many pipes do we own, how many kilometers do we own, and what cost does that come in? So the costs that are in this asset management plans are broken down into unit costs, some based on industry standards, some based on inflation. So it's a combination of many things. I also think the development, new assets that have come into play over the years also plays a contributing factor to that. I can speak to that side of it if you want to add any further comments that you have.
I guess.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yeah, it is a combination of inflation. The assumption of new subdivision assets is also included in there. And then also refining that asset list. So identifying assets that we hadn't recognized previously.
Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. To you, Mr. Mayor. So in one of the charts here, we have roughly 6% or 154 million of assets in very poor condition, and another 8% or 200 million in poor condition. In combining that with the life cycle management strategy or plan, can you just quickly just summarize how does that work in terms of if our assets are very poor, is that our first priority to ensure that that's fixed, or are there other variables or multipliers here, like certain assets have a higher weighting because of the service level it offers now to residents versus something that, like, let's say roads versus a facility where we can kind of prolong the usage and hence the life cycle management might be different. Can you try to summarize in layman's terms in terms of how that formula would work to help us prioritize where our resources should be going?
Cres.
I think what it boils down to is when we look at an asset management plan, it is a prediction model. It's a communication tool and it's a prediction. It's not based on, it's not your project plan. It gives you a high level view of where your needs are based on the information. And if I do this, maybe addresses in two-part answer. When we look at the assets that are in very poor condition, that may be attributed to not having assessed condition data on those assets. We're simply relying on age-based condition. Those assets may be performing just fine, but because of the analysis and the data that we're using, it comes out as being very poor. And I'm not saying that's in all cases. So that's first off, I wanted to address that not all assets have assessed condition. We're solely basing it off of data that we have. Excuse me. As far as prioritizing, that now comes into play with your team. When you start looking at your projects coming forward in the future, you look at risk analysis. So you have a very robust risk analysis. So risk analysis will come into play into that to say which assets are at the higher risk of failure, depending on what they're used for, what their purposes are, and also coordination of projects. So if we're looking at core infrastructure, we don't just simply replace the worst first. We look at where there's opportunity to coordinate. Sometimes you have to let the worst get worse and spend some money on assets. If we do something to them now, we're going to save far more money in the long run by utilizing that funding somewhere else. Now, again, the plan doesn't define that. That's something that internally your staff will decide what projects will come forward based on their own prioritization mechanisms. Hope that answers the question.
Councillor.
Thank you. And finally, my last question. Some of us recently came back from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference, and one of the presentations I attended was AI related. So from the vendors that you see that are contracted by municipalities, is AI being used today? Or, I mean, it's just really just been in our lexicon in the last 12 months, really. But one example is how one municipality is using drones to film, 200 kilometers worth of fencing to see, the condition of the fence, as opposed to somebody taking 20 hours to walk it. So is there anything upcoming in the next couple of years that could help drive some of the maintenance or any of these costs down?
Cres.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. That's a good question as well. I think there's a limited use of AI technology. There's lots of AI technology out there, which you're referring to as LiDAR technology, where they scan a road or fence lines. Again, in my experience, there's majority, not a majority, but there's error in that. So there's a lot of analysis that goes into actually determining whether that information is valid. I do think AI plays a part as far as technology goes, but I don't think we're to a point where we're going to rely on AI to tell us what we need to do to our assets. It's going to give us a lot of information and data back to make some conscious decisions on where we want to spend that money.
Councillor.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just noticed something here on page 10. It said that will allow the town to continue enhancing their asset management maturity level. We had a very extensive report, maybe 2019, with our budget on the maturity of our town assets. So I don't know if that has been used in the evaluation of this. But if not, I appreciate if you'd look at it. We spoke before and you said that we've improved, but to me, this is all very concerning because of the condition of the assets and the money involved. For example, in table 1, which is on page 3, the road network is at 65, which means that, some roads are in better quality, some are in worse. It wasn't very long ago that when an individual road hit 65%, well, we knew that was time to repair it, because if we waited, it would cost us more and perhaps we would even have to replace it. So I'm not feeling very comfortable that our road network is at 65, because it means that some roads we've ignored or had to ignore, presumably because of finance. With respect to bridges and culverts, I'm not feeling very confident that's the low end of good for bridges and culverts. that would definitely need some attention very soon. And then, going to machinery and equipment, I did have a conversation with Mr. CAO, and we may be doing better than other municipalities, but average asset condition of 38%, that's in the poor category. I'm not comfortable with the water network, the sanitary sewer network, the storm sewer network. I mean, they're all in the 60s. Storm sewer is 64. As you said, we've done a better job with that. But, having our water network and our sanitary sewer network at the low end of good is also concerning to me. Now, I'm not a finance person. And I know that there is a plan, but I can't say whether the plan will help me with my concerns. And with respect to what Councillor Thompson said about, looking at whether we could, service level on things like roads, or sitting politicians, we certainly hear when the roads have deteriorated significantly, and there are road repair that we had to put off in the last budget. So this whole report is very concerning to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gallo.
Thank you. I share some of the concerns and comments of my colleagues. Is there a time frame to approve this? I realize it's here tonight, and it'll be, if it moves forward, at council at the end of the month.
Ms. Ware, I guess.
Per the Ontario regulation, we do have some time frames that we do need to meet for this. So for July 1st of 2024, the regulation requires, so it's a little difficult to say, is that we have an approved asset management plan for all infrastructure assets that identifies current levels of service and the cost of maintaining those levels of service, which is included in this plan. The financial strategy for that is not due until July 1st next year. So while there is the financial strategy to be able to meet these levels of service and everything that's included in here, it doesn't need to be approved at that point, which is why we're looking at that financial strategy again in September. So we're separating that for the discussion. The other factor council should consider is that in this year's budget, we also invested a significant amount in asset management, and there's going to be asset management staff within both engineering, finance, and other areas within the organization. They're going to take this plan and they're going to run with it and do a lot of the analysis, and they're going to look for those opportunities for balancing the asset management needs over time. So that work will also be happening over the next couple of years as those teams get started.
Councilor.
So am I understanding that the the data in terms of our assets and the value of them and the analysis that we've done needs to be done rather quickly, whereas the financial side of it, we have some time. Is that right?
I see a nodding of the head, but Ms. Wainwright and Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we have some time to figure out the financial strategy for that. What's in here is what's recommended, but staff is going to take it away and do some further analysis to get us through this term, and then look at it again to see what we can do for the longer term.
Councilor.
So in terms of the analysis and how we came about with all of the figures, did we take into account all of our strategies, plans for all of the various asset groups that we have in place? Did they play a large role in terms of how we determined? I can be specific in terms of the fleet management. In 2019, we developed a fleet management strategy. I didn't hear, there's not one word on or relating back to that strategy in the report. And I'm wondering, I guess, a few things. Are we following that strategy? And if so, how come it's not mentioned anywhere in this? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So part of developing this report included conversations with all the asset owners. So in conversations with fleet, they would have taken into account what was included in the fleet management report and the recommendations that was in that report to develop the levels of service that are recommended. While it's not specifically mentioned, it was part of what informed the level of service for fleet.
Counselor?
Okay, probably not a bad thing to mention a significant report that this council actually mandated happen because we wanted to get a grasp of fleet back then. I'm a little unclear. I know you went through it in terms of if we move forward with at least some of the financial planning for this, what the impact is to the taxpayer. Not necessarily from the water and that side of it, but can you just go through that with me one more time in the various scenarios?
Cres?
It's a very good question. The impacts of the taxpayers. Although the asset management plan is a recommendation, if adopted, even with the financial strategy, it doesn't necessarily that you are adopting that financial plan. It's a recommendation. Over time, and I'll revisit that. There's some comments that were made earlier. That's why you revisit every year. You have to revisit your revenue streams, look at where your tax dollars are going, look at your target levels of service and see where you're at. That's why the OREGs have outlined revisiting that plan every year to review kind of where you're at. Are we making progress? You might be making immense progress if new data and information comes in. At that point, you'll readjust. So again, it's not, the asset management plan is not something that you're adopting as far as what you're going to implement. It's simply a recommendation, and an adoption of that plan is just acknowledging that there is an infrastructure deficit and you're working towards filling that gap.
Counselor?
Okay. There was one particular, in my view, an anomaly on, I think it was, let me just pull it up. The storm network 6.3, and the annual requirement is 8.4 million. We're currently funding 2.4 million, so we're short $6 million. Can someone just touch on that, how we could be so far off?
Cres?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Another good question. I get this very common. This is a very common question. Stormwater infrastructure seems to be the asset group that has been the forgotten child. We've installed it in the ground. It disperses, water runoff. But there's a lot of information that's missing. Good condition data on your underground infrastructure for one. So a comment back to a previous comment about the condition of the assets. Well, we're solely basing a lot of this off of age-based conditions. And we say 60% condition on average on the water network may not have assessed condition on 75% of that network. So we're really, again, relying on age-based condition. Stormwater inventories are very consistent throughout municipalities. They're the most underfunded asset category, no matter which municipality we look at. And when those numbers that we're seeing in your asset management plan are not much different than what we see with many municipalities. And the reasoning behind that lack of data, lack of information, because we really haven't looked at it for many, many years. I'm not saying that's the case here. They may have some really good assessments on some of the infrastructure, but there's more work to be done. And that's where that recommendation for a formal condition assessment program and investing in assessed condition is going to tell you what you really need versus what we're predicting what you need based on the data we have today.
Counselor?
Thank you. I seem to remember many budgets for many years, cameras everywhere, and we spent a lot of money on this. It just doesn't seem right that we're that far off. The others, seem a little bit more reasonable with everything that, the cost of everything. This one just seems like something's not right. There are more, but I don't know if I'm prepared to move forward with either of the two in terms of how we've analyzed it and the financial side just yet. I would love to have more time and even a special meeting. This is that significant, I think, that we have to really do our best to get it right.
Thank you. Councilor Thompson?
Thank you. I do also want to say that, you know, this is good work. It's necessary work. Certainly appreciate all of the time and energy that's gone in to identify and evaluate our assets. You know, we've heard in the past how, you know, Aurora has sort of been one of the municipalities that have been sort of leading the charge in the development of these plans. And I think it's great that we continue to do this, but I'm still struggling with some of the recommendations. And so my question through you to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel. The third recommendation is that the proposed capital asset levels of service measures and targets be approved. You mentioned earlier that we still have time to debate the fiscal strategy and come up with alternatives. That's not due until July 1st, 2025. But aren't we somewhat limited if we approve that third bullet point in terms of our conversations around the fiscal strategy, if we're looking at different horizons in terms of the 15 or 20-year timeline, or is that still all able to be discussed?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the levels of services that are identified here have indicated what the infrastructure gap is. Part of the fiscal strategy that we're going to put forward to how to meet this is the timing over the strategies that we're going to use to try and meet that gap. So the timing may not necessarily be what's recommended here, or it may be something a little bit longer or shorter, depending on the different types of asset classes. The other piece is this is going to get looked at on an annual basis, and the levels of service are going to be a target. They're not going to be something we're going to meet immediately. So we can change them in the future. If we realize that, you know, we're just not going to be able to get there, we can change them. Or if we decide the level of service for one asset class just isn't sufficient, we can change it in the future. So we're not hard and fast stuck with the levels of service that are in here. So we can make those amendments as we go forward, and we'll have that annual update to see how we're progressing in our different areas. And we'll also have that annual update to see how our financial strategy is working as well.
Council.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if you can answer it tonight, but maybe next week at council. But when we approved our budget, it's a multi-year budget. And so the projected tax rate for 2025 was 3.5%. That was based on essentially 0.8% being allocated towards capital assets. Now we're calling for, if approved, a 1.63, which is a 0.83 increase. Are we still able to project a tax rate for 2025 at 3.5% or less?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think we can do that. I think we can meet the recommendation in here for the tax funded assets. We do have some opportunities that we did include in the budget last year, particularly in 2026, our LED debt project, the debt on that completes, that is tax funded. We can convert that to asset management contributions. And the same with the producer responsibility for waste. We had already planned on converting a lot of that to asset management contributions. And between those two and the current contributions that we have in our fiscal strategy, we are very close to meeting what our obligations would be over 2025 and 2026.
Thank you. That's positive here. I'm sure that we all recognize the importance of ensuring that we're taking care of our infrastructure, but we also want to do it in a reasonable budget approach. And as long as we can continue to maintain those levels that we've already agreed upon, that's good news.
Any other comments or questions? Councilor Gallo, second time.
Thank you. Sorry, just on page 75 of our report 3, I think the top says average annual requirements per household of 2193, and then there's 4 different breakdowns there. Tax funded assets, average annual tax change of 1.63, rate funded water 1.92, rate funded sanitary 1.67, and then rate funded storm 4.92. So that's 10.14% increase. I'm just trying to understand, particularly the last one, just under 5% increase, and the impact that would be on either residents or the business community in town.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the storm increase in particular is only applicable to the stormwater charge that goes currently on our water bills. It does not impact anything else. So the increments for each service area are not cumulative. They don't add together. They only apply to those specific charges themselves. So on the water bill, right now you have the water charge, the wastewater charge, and the stormwater charge. So those will blend together for an average increase on the bill. I don't have what that number is right now, but it's the overall bill itself is not going to increase by the 4.9%. It'd be a lesser amount because the other amounts are smaller overall.
Councillor.
So do we have a sense of an average of what the storm component of that water bill is? Is it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or is it?
Mr. Mayor Van Kessel.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll get back to you with that information on what it would look like for the average bill.
Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Kim? Second time?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't mean to go line by line, but just want to highlight one item that will probably be indicative of all the other items that have 0 in the appendix. 10 is it on the report? In terms of the stormwater management ponds, we have approximately 50 of them in Aurora, and I recall that many of them will be needing dredging and that sort of cleanup. And yet for the next 10 years, the schedule here, it says 0 right across the board. I suspect there's an obvious response to that, but I'm not understanding it. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff or Mr. Vander Heiden, can you shed some light on that, please?
Cres.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, when you see zeros across the board, especially storm water, what that is indicating, we're basing this off an age-based condition or an ACE-based assessment. So just to put context to it, if stormwater management plan lasts 25 years, estimated useful life, it will not show up in the calculations because we're not really scheduling, we're just predicting what those needs are. I'm sure there's a lot of rehabilitations coming up for stormwater management ponds, like many municipalities face, because it's something that, over the last 20 years, we've been seeing more and more of this. In the past, no one really identified the capital requirements, the long-term sustainability on stormwater management ponds. So for the town of Aurora, they've actually went the distance to define that there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of capital requirements coming forward. But again, the 10-year capital plan doesn't show it simply because it's probably based on an age-based analysis and it's outside the scope of that 10 years.
Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Chris. So Council, I'm going to go with 14.1, the Natural Capital Asset Management Plan. And for this one, we have presentation as well by Elaine Chang from SLBC Inc. Elaine, welcome. Hi, floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Elaine Chang from SLBC. We're a small engineering firm that focuses on asset management planning and asset management improvements, generally in municipalities, although we also do work with other levels of government. So thank you for having me here today. I'm also with my colleague, Amy Taylor. She is online. And so we partnered with Green Analytics, who specialize in natural assets. And so we pulled this plan together. She's available. I will be presenting, but she will be available for questions afterward. The natural environment is one of the pillars. It's one of the pillars of success in the town's strategic plan, and the town owns and maintains a large portfolio of natural capital assets. This natural capital asset management plan was developed to help the town define the levels of service that it expects from these assets and to plan the renewal and maintenance activities that will be needed to sustain those levels of service over the next 25 years. As council is aware, through OREG 58817, the province has mandated that municipalities establish long-term plans for sustaining their built and natural assets. The town has already met the 2019 and 2022 milestone requirements of OREG 58817, and this natural capital asset management plan contributes to fulfillment of both the 2024 and 2025 requirements. And I say contributes because in combination with the asset management plan presentation you just heard together, you will be meeting those requirements. The regulation also requires that progress implementing AM plans be reviewed annually and that the AM plans be updated at least every 5 years. This natural capital asset management plan covers 2 categories of assets: natural area assets, including forests, open spaces, wetlands, water bodies, and watercourses, and natural enhanced assets, which include urban trees, and that includes street trees and park trees, urban parks, which includes the natural areas or the natural assets within the parks, not the built assets, which were covered in the previous asset management plan that was just presented. Natural enhanced assets also include community gardens and the pet cemetery. In total, we estimated the value of these assets to be over $237 million. And so, of course, that's in addition to the $2.5 billion that you just heard about. The bulk of this value is in, as you can see in the pie chart, is in urban trees, urban forests, and open spaces, and water courses. For natural assets, the valuation is generally based on cost of restoration, while urban tree value includes cost of removal and replacement. Property value is not included. Next slide. We found that 86% of the town's natural assets are in good or very good condition, 13% are in fair condition, 1% are in poor condition, and 0.3% are in very poor condition. The assets in poor and very poor condition are urban trees, and they're shown at the bottom of the bar chart. Very poor condition indicates that the assets are dead or and that they're due or overdue for replacement. There were 666 of these in the inventory, out of an inventory of over 26,000 urban trees. Condition assessment data was available only for urban trees. For the other asset types, condition scores were based on staff knowledge of the assets. Natural area assets were reported to be all in good or very good condition. And it's hard to see in the bar chart, but the pet cemetery is in good condition, although it's currently under restoration. And regarding the community gardens, one of them is in good condition, and the other, which is brand new, is of course in very good condition. In urban parks, the natural assets consist primarily of the grassy areas, and those were reported to be overall in fair condition due to weeds and areas of heavy use. Next slide. 3 asset management strategies were defined, each delivering different levels of service for different annual cost levels. Scenario A represents the status quo renewal and maintenance activities and costs. Scenario B includes the status quo activities with a moderate increase in rehab, maintenance, and monitoring activities for natural assets. And scenario C includes the status quo activities with a slightly higher increase in those life cycle activities. Next slide. This table details the differences in rehab, maintenance, and monitoring activities across the scenarios A, B, and C over the 25-year planning period. Key differences are highlighted in blue and include the number of net new, in the first line you see there in blue, the number of net new urban trees planted. So the higher numbers of trees in scenarios B and C would help the town meet its canopy target of 40%. And there are also new trees planted in natural areas. That's the second line there. These are planted through partnerships, and the quantity is the same across all scenarios you'll see. So we anticipate over 11,000 trees, new trees to be planted over the next 25 years, assuming that those partnerships continue. Halfway down, you'll see the number of urban trees replaced. So assuming that park trees live an average of 80 years and street trees live an average of 50 years, we estimated that about 295 trees per year would require replacement out of the town's 26,000 urban trees. Scenario A allows for a replacement of 82% of those trees each year, which means that that will leave, so that's the status quo, and that means that we'll leave a growing backlog of dead and dying trees. As we saw in the through the condition assessment, there's actually a backlog right now of 666 trees requiring replacement. Scenario B allows for a slightly higher replacement rate of 95% of the projected need, and scenario C aims to keep up with that projected need. Condition assessments for natural areas are also a key difference across the scenarios. As shown under scenario A, the town does not currently conduct on-the-ground visual inspections of natural area assets. Under scenario B, all the natural area assets would be assessed over a period of 6 years, and after that, once every 10 years. Scenario C is slightly more aggressive in trying to cover all of those natural area assets in the first 5 years, and then reducing the frequency again down to once every 10 years after that. The scenarios also vary in the amount of restoration work included, specifically invasive species control and targeted seeding and planting. In scenarios B and C, this work would be informed by the findings of the condition assessments. Increasing these activities will improve the resilience of the town's natural area assets to environmental and climate threats, such as invasive species, pests, disease, heat, drought, and so on. Next slide. The costs of the different scenarios are shown here over the 25-year planning period from 2025 to 2049. Under scenario A, we see that sustaining the status quo activities would cost $37.9 million over 25 years, or an average of $1.5 million a year. This is the amount that the town currently spends on all the scenario A activities listed on the previous slide, and includes labor, materials, and services under operating costs, as well as capital costs. Scenario B costs about $1.8 million a year, which is a $300,000 a year increase over the current state. And scenario C costs about $2.3 million a year, which would represent an $800,000 a year increase. This AM plan recommends scenario B because it would allow the town to begin a condition assessment program for natural assets. It would allow the town to increase invasive species control and targeted planting, to increase resilience to environmental and climate hazards. It would also allow the town to increase urban tree replacements to address the current backlog of 666 trees, and increase the planting of net new urban trees toward achieving the town's tree canopy target. Note that the condition assessment program for natural area assets may result in additions or changes to the needs and risks identified, as well as the estimated funds needed. To fund scenario B, the town would need to seek additional revenues through, past that previous slide, to seek additional revenues through taxation or grants, or reallocate funds from other programs, which might result in reduced service levels in other programs. It's also important to note that scenario B assumes that existing partnerships with external organizations will continue, including maintenance agreements with external landowners such as Ducks Unlimited to allow public access to those privately owned lands, tree planting programs, and volunteer programs to remove invasive species. Loss of these partnerships would result in lower levels of service or a need to increase funding to cover those activities. Next slide. The town is continually working to improve its asset management practices so that forecasts are more accurate and planned activities better address the community's needs and do so at a lower cost. In preparation for future updates to the asset management plan, it's recommended that the town continue refining how it manages levels of service by monitoring its current levels of service and costs and the associated costs to inform future adjustments. By establishing level of service targets for town-owned trees based on current town-wide targets. So for example, the town-wide target for the tree canopy is 40%. How much of that 40% should be composed of town-owned trees? And incorporating natural asset impacts into the town's other emissions plans, such as the conservation and demand management plan and the community energy plan, making for a more integrated overall set of planning documents. The town is also encouraged to continue improving its asset management processes, technologies, and data by establishing land type naming standards so that planning is consistent across all the different strategic documents, and continuing to implement a maintenance management system to more accurately capture operations and maintenance costs, and continuing also to develop natural asset risk assessment methodologies. Finally, I'd like to wrap up by emphasizing that the town is quite advanced relative to many municipalities and how it manages its natural assets, specifically recognizing that the town has established a detailed inventory of its natural assets, along with condition data on all urban trees, and has also established formal maintenance standards for these assets. I think it's also important to recognize that the partnerships are highly beneficial for tree planting and invasive species control. So again, kudos to the town for maintaining those partnerships.
Thank you, Elaine. Councilor Garner, you pulled this one. Did you want to move the recommendation? Thank you. Seconder. Councilor Kim, comments or questions to the presentation or the report? Councilor Garner, go ahead.
Thank you for coming. I just want to clarify what you said, what's in the report. If we go with scenario B, because with scenario A as it exists now, we have a backlog of, did you say 660 trees?
Yeah.
So if we go with scenario B, we can make up that backlog and maybe even plant some new have some net tree growth. With the 40% that we've got with the canopy, so what if we don't do scenario B? Like what happens with the canopy?
Elaine?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Through the mayor, we do so the canopy will be increased through any net new tree planting, and scenario A does include some net new tree planting. It's just at a lower rate of planting than scenario B. So scenario A over the 25 years includes 1,500 trees. Scenario B includes 2,000. And we could try and translate that into a canopy coverage amount, but that gets a little tricky because it depends on how, in what year, because how old are the trees and when did you plant them? And so the canopy coverage of a tree will vary from, say, a square meter when you first plant it to maybe 9 or 10 years or 15 years down, and you're planting them all at different times. So it just gets tricky to try and estimate that. So for now, we've left it at just sort of, recognizing that if you plant more, you'll get closer to that 40% target. And I didn't include in this version. I know we talked about it at the EAC meeting, but the town's current canopy coverage townwide is, I think 34%, and from what we analyzed, 6.4% is 6.4% is town-owned trees. So if you just took away all of the privately owned trees, you would have a coverage of 6.4%.
Councilor?
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor. And the backlog of the 660 trees that we needed to have planted, we're just talking about municipal planting.
Yes. Thank you.
Are we speaking to the report as well?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your work. We've learned over the years how important trees are for so many reasons, and it is in the report. With respect to climate change, we're talking about flooding and carbon sequestration, and they are so important. I don't think that even though the town is doing relatively better than other municipalities, I don't think that we should consider that good enough if we have a backlog of trees that we should have planted and we haven't planted. So it goes to the quality of life in our community and the health of our community and how potentially whether climate change. So I definitely think that scenario B is the least that we can do. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. I got a question in regards to table 3 in the report, the comparison of the 10 and 25-year costs. I'm not sure who best to answer it, so maybe I'll direct it to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel. Maybe she can help. Question really is around scenario A, which is status quo, and the question is that what we do today? Because we say the anticipated annual average funding is $2 million. So I'm trying to understand, if we were talking about the status quo, is that what we spend today?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, that is what is currently embedded within budgets today. So much of this is also embedded within Ms. Teenkamp's parks budget for a lot of the maintenance work that happens with the trees we currently do.
Councilor.
Thank you. And then perhaps either yourself or Mrs. Steenkamp can answer. So if today, under the status quo scenario, we're spending $2 million a year, and we say that's the cost over the next 10 years, why is it going down to $1.5 million in the 25-year cost bucket for status quo? What's the $500,000 delta?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe part of that is to do with the backlog of tree plantings. And one of the things that we're looking to help with that backlog is we are currently working on a grant application to support tree planting and the viability of the trees that we do plant.
Councilor.
Just a general comment. I do agree with Councilor Gardner when talks about the value of this work and the importance to continue to do what we can to push the envelope. And I'd be supportive of scenario B. But again, we're being asked to approve service levels that have tax implications and trying to figure out how we're going to pay for it later. You do indicate that if we go with scenario B, it's a 0.5 percentage point increase. And by itself, it's one thing, but we just came off one conversation with regards to asset management plan and potential impact there. Now we're having this conversation about a potential impact. So there's 2 other items to be talked about tonight in terms of the Windrow program, increase in sidewalk maintenance, also have budget increase. So it would have been helpful if we could have the financial strategy conversation at the same time we're doing this, but I think it's valuable, but it would be nice to see the whole picture and understand what that impact is on the budget.
Any other comments, questions? Councilor Gardner, second time.
Thank you. And Councillor Thompson, I really always appreciate your comments. My comment in return is that this is not something that we can afford to neglect. And I know well, I was feeling rather not well today when I was reading about all the money that we need to spend. But with respect to trees, I think it's crucial, and I think we have to do this. So.
Yep. Any other comments, questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Pardon? We're passing what the recommendation is. You can change it at council if you like. You want B, don't you? Yes, that's what we just voted on. And it just passed. Okay. That carries. Thank you very much, Stelling.
Thank you.
I voted on what was recommended. Yes, we got our health break.
What it is, I didn't make a note of it last week.
All right, council, we are back. Move to 13.1, which is with the Windrows pilot program extension. Someone want to move the recommendation? Councilor Reese, thank you. Seconder. On once. Councilor Gallo, thank you. Any comments or questions on this one? We need direction on 3, by the way, so we'll get to that. Councilor Reese, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I was looking at the various options and all the rest of it. I want to thank staff for pulling all that together because they captured a lot of the questions that other people had. The first issue is that this is coming out of tax stabilization. And my understanding of the use of tax stabilization is that it's for something that's unique and we're only going to use it usually as a one-off. And I believe the Windrow program is likely here to stay, although the pilot was cut short simply because the weather was so unique last year. I'm just wondering about the value of taking it out of its tax stabilization versus just putting in the budget. So it's in our budgets for the next or for the balance of the term. So through you to probably Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel about the use of tax stabilization for this in its second year.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Maris, my recommendation would be is if this is going to continue as a pilot, that we continue to fund it from tax stabilization. If council decides to make this an ongoing program, then at that point, it should be included in the overall budget and not funded from tax stabilization, unless we're phasing in the costs over a period of time.
Councillor.
Okay, thanks. The notion has been floated around by a number of people about the eligibility. And there have been testimony, I suppose you could talk about that, about various households who have maybe two 65-year-old or eligible people, but they have a young person who's living in the home who is capable of being able to do this. And this is not just 1 or 2 times. And it's important for the integrity of the program that we're diligent about this. So could you remind everybody about that eligibility process and how people are signing up for this? Because we had quite a great response last year. And I just want to reaffirm the eligibility of this through you to Ms. Steenkamp, I think.
Ms. Steenkamp.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the eligibility process, the residents actually sign a declaration stating that they meet the criteria, that they're 65 or older, or have a physical disability that limits them from participating in shoveling snow. That being said, we have had some complaints from neighboring residents talking about their neighbors suggesting that there are people that are living in the house that are under 65 and able-bodied. From a standpoint of staff, it's very hard for us to control that or deal with it. It's without knocking on the door and asking for proof ourselves. So we are going on the truth that somebody has signed and acknowledged that they are the only people in the house that are capable of doing that.
Councillor.
Would there be any sense then of if someone is violating it, that there's a fine of some kind? Do you think that would be effective, or do you think it's just not nearly enough of a problem for us? Through you to Mrs. Steenkamp.
Steenkamp.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly other municipalities have been trying to deal with this as well. It's difficult for us as municipalities to deal with that and prove it. Some municipalities have implemented a cost recovery program where residents are responsible for paying for the service or a nominal fee towards the service. And that seems to help weed out some of the people that are maybe not eligible for the program or applying for the program when they're not qualified.
Certainly. Well, we want to have the integrity of the program not questioned. So I'm just bringing these up for you to consider. And the option C, which is the cost recovery, was interesting. And there are programs that are people are eligible through low income thresholds, and that they declare that they have low income thresholds, because we've had people also who have they believe as relatively high income levels and yet are into the program when they could very well afford to do this themselves. So I like the notion of cost recovery, but on the other hand, then we have so many of our seniors who are struggling economically, and we want to make sure that they're safe with their Windrows cleaned out. So I'm wondering if you have looked at the cost and the work of identifying eligible people through low income thresholds. Through you to Ms. Steenkamp.
Ms. Steenkamp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, we currently haven't looked at that in a fulsome picture. I think we were looking for direction from council to see whether there was interest in that, and then we'd look at it more completely and come up with some sort of eligibility criteria.
Councillor?
Because I'd like to see it extended, because there's economies of scales for everybody to have it, or many people to have it. But we also can't afford to have everybody having it unless we're targeting those people who are low income and who are disabled, or those who are older. So I like the work that's been done thus far, and I want to continue the Windrow program. I just want to find a way to make sure that the eligibility is clear to everybody, and that if there's an option for a cost recovery from people, that they should be allowed to get that. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was open to the pilot program and to see how this played out, and really appreciate staff and the feedback that they received from residents through the survey. And it tells me that 83% are satisfied with the program, 96% would like to continue with the program, but only 1/3 would be willing to pay any nominal fee for the program. Given that we've had 2 presentations on asset management plans, there's going to be significant tax pressures this year, and we're going to have to make some big decisions. And for us funding this, whether it's through tax stabilization reserve or through our tax levy, it's still money going out of the town, and it equals 0.5%. Certainly there's a need. It's unfortunate that all municipalities, our only form of tax of revenues through property taxes, and there's only so much that we can do. There's a lot of social service gaps in society, and I don't believe that it should fall on the municipality to cover most of them. I think we should try our best to ensure, if we continue with this program, that the 1,000 or so that enter this program are indeed eligible. But I do believe that there has to be some form of cost recovery, whether it's 75 or 150. I think that's a nominal fee for Windrow service for those who really need it. I truly do empathize with those who don't have anyone, but I think we can only provide the service that we can provide. And I think if we do go ahead with it, I would be in favor of some form of fee for the household. And I think a small nominal fee to help out is not an inordinate ask. So I'm not in favor of having a second year with fully funded by the town, but I would be in favor of just continuing this with staff's recommendation of an appropriate fee to the user.
So you're looking for option C?
Option C is still, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you. Yeah, we've seen how successful the program was in our first year, where there was no fee associated. I think that The initial reports projected, I think 400 or 500 driveways we thought, and it turned out being, twice that amount. And as we continue this as a pilot program to better evaluate, I'm supportive of the idea of trying option 3 and applying a cost associated with it, so that when it does come time for council to decide whether or not this program will be permanent and how it'll be paid for, we've seen both options and can make a decision. But I'm cognizant of the fact that there are some seniors that this may be a struggle for. And I think that if we do go down the road of option C, that there needs to be, as Mrs. Teamcamp mentioned, perhaps some eligibility or criteria, or at least some discretion on staff to be able to evaluate for those that truly, it would be a hardship for them, but necessarily need the service. So there needs to be some flexibility built into it. So through you to Mrs. Teamcamp, if council were to decide to move forward for the pilot program, but option C, is there time for you to come back to us with some thoughts around how to address that concern for those that may be truly challenged to pay even a nominal fee?
Steenkamp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have given it a little bit of consideration, but it hasn't been thoroughly thought through or plotted yet. But I do think we probably could come back to you in September with something.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Someone like to put forward some direction here for number 3? Councillor Kemp? Option C? Someone want to second that? Councillor Thompson? Option C, it says yes, we would still continue the program the way it was currently done. The only difference is that we would look at doing a partial cost recovery rate to be applied. Okay. So that's option C. I got a mover and a seconder. Councillor Kim, Councillor Thompson, second. Please. Any questions on that? Or am I going to call the vote? Call the vote. Option C. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Back to the main motion as amended. Councillor Thompson, second time.
Thank you. Just for clarity, does there need to be an amendment for Mrs. Teamcamp to come back with some more details around the eligibility or criteria? If it's understood, then that's fine. But if
I'm seeing it not ahead, so she's gonna come back in September with that eligibility criteria that we've been asking around the table. Okay. Councillor Reese, second.
So with that, a hybrid situation where you're looking at low income thresholds and opportunities, because there are people out there who absolutely need it, and some who may need it but may be willing to pay for it or able to pay for it. I really don't want any seniors or disabled people to be struggling with this, and particularly if they're unfunded. So if you can bring that back to us as well, I'd appreciate it.
Yep. Any other comments, questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Well, that carries. 13.2 Sidewalk Winter Maintenance Service Delivery Review. Councillor Gardner, you pulled this one. Did you want to move the recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Thompson, thank you. Any comments, questions to this one? Councillor Reese?
Just through you to Ms. Teamcamp, you make mention in here about the sidewalk repairs that happen, and I get those questions all the time about the contractors or our staff who rip up the grass on either sides of the sidewalks. Do you have a number of what that costs us in terms of repairing that through you to Ms. Teamcamp?
Ms. Teamcamp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's included in the cost for the service that's provided. So it's in the annual rate from the contractor per route.
Okay, so okay, thank you. The other thing is, as I read it, and adding additional routes really just allows us to get the work done according to our service standards, so that all of our sidewalks are cleared by such and such a time. Is that basically what the ask is here in terms of adding additional routes?
Ms. Steenkamp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly, yes, it is. If we added 2 additional routes, it'll decrease the total number of kilometers per route. And then that would allow us to meet the service level standard within the 24 hours. Currently, we're meeting it in some instances when it's just a light snow or if it's just a salting exercise. But when we get into a significant amount of snow, we're not meeting those service levels. So we are outside of the 24-hour service level that council has approved. And so then we're putting ourselves at risk because that is over and above the minimum maintenance standards.
And this report shows to us that we're a little different than other municipalities in that regard. And so that what we're doing here is adding our service standards to meet typical municipalities elsewhere as well. Is that correct? For you?
Ms. Steenkamp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, our current service standards approved by council are very similar to many other municipalities in our area. We're just not meeting them currently with the length of route per unit. So our length of route per unit is over 30 kilometers. So that extends the amount of time that it takes for the drivers to complete the route. If we do decrease it to in around that 25, it'll be similar to other municipalities in the length of the route, and we'll be able to meet our service level.
Thank you.
Councillor?
Further.
Thank you. Councillor Garner?
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Or perhaps this is a comment to council, just. I thought about this report carefully because I am worried about spending money. I'm worried about our budget, but we're talking about, as Ms. Steenkamp said, risk. And I think we have to do this to mitigate any risk. And I like the option of the in-house, the way it was done this year. So is that what the motion says? Or does it not address that?
Says staff increased the number of sidewalk routes from 8 to 10 for the 2024.
I think I'm wrong on this.
You are.
I am.
But
so
didn't want to put it that way, but since you said it, I might as well just say yes.
Yeah, always admit when you're wrong. Yes, I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Through you to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel. I support the idea of the motion before us, but I just want to understand the financial implications. We say that if the town proceeds with the 2 additional routes, it is recommended that the $120,000 budget pressure be funded from the tax rate stabilization reserve for the 2024 and 2025 winter season. But at the same time, we're also saying that the incremental cost would then become a tax levy pressure that would be phased in over the 2025 and 2026 operating budget. So I'm trying to understand how we're saying that we're going to pay for it for the winter season of 24-25 with the tax rate stabilization, but it's also a tax levy pressure on the 25 budget.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So for the 24-25 winter season, that would be through November through March of next year. So this year, we cannot change the levy for what we have for this year. So that would need to come from tax stabilization. So the proposal would be the additional contracted piece for this winter season would be funded from tax stabilization. The next winter season would begin at the end of next year. So we would put that component into next year's budget as as a tax levy pressure. And then the portion that would then impact 26 would be in the next year. So by the end of that 25-26 winter season, you would have essentially a 1-year cost in there that would cover both ends of the season for both 25 and 26 and going forward.
So since we approve our 25 budget in December, is it not possible just to use the tax rate stabilization for the months of this year, and then put the tax levy pressure to cover this program from January to March of 2025, rather than relying solely on the tax rate stabilization?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is an option. There are different strategies. The only year that we cannot add it to the levy would be this year because final tax bills have gone out.
For sure. I just, I don't want to use the tax rate stabilization and push the pressure further down if it's not totally necessary for 2025.
Councillor Kim.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. One of the big reasons why we want to increase the service levels when it comes to snow plowing on sidewalks and roads is because, as the report states, it decreases the litigation and perhaps leading to less of an increase in our town's insurance premiums. It would, I think it would be a convincing case and a more helpful stance for us if we see, obviously, if you clear the snow and we have great service levels, it has immediate benefits to those who are going to be walking on the sidewalk. I'm just wondering, through Mr. Mayor, to sure if it's our solicitor, is there a stat or report that states that if you meet service levels when it comes to snow plowing, that litigation or the number of lawsuits in a municipality declines X%, therefore premiums will stay at a certain level versus, like, I would like to see something like we're going to be spending 120,000 to increase our service levels, but the benefits would be our insurance premiums may only go up 5% a year as opposed to 8% a year, equating to a certain dollar figure. Is there anything like that we can kind of put our hat on?
Sarah?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are no stats per se, but what I can tell you is that when we look at claims and we deny them because we do meet our minimum maintenance standards, so we do deny them because we meet our minimum maintenance standards. And on top of all that, over the past several years, we have had good loss history and our insurance premiums have steadily remained low. So you can make an inference, but there's no stats per se.
Councillor?
Thank you.
You, Councillor Gallo, first time.
Thank you. On page 3 of 8, under the analysis, it says that the town's contractor has encountered numerous challenges in adhering to council-approved service levels of plowing all sidewalks within 24 hours. The expanded and lengthy sidewalk routes have proven difficult to cover and excessively time-consuming within the designated time frame. We have a contract with someone. They know the routes. They know our service level. Why does it matter to us if they're having difficulty? The responsibility is theirs to fulfill their obligation on those routes at the prescribed service level. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Steenkamp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the length of the routes is what proves difficult. It's the amount of time that it takes those operators to complete the route. It's outside of 12 hours in one, and they can only drive 13 hours within a day. So, and that's labor law and Highway Traffic Act that dictates that. So those are some parameters that kind of limit us within that. And the contractor also has difficult, there's breakdowns within equipment, there's staffing issues, not unlike our staff ourselves. We can encounter those problems as well. And it's hard for anybody, whether it was municipal staff or the contractor, to have reserve staff in lying in wait just in case of those instances.
Councillor?
I don't know. I find some difficulty in that. We have a contract with someone, we pay them, they know how many kilometers they have to do, they know what their service level is. It's incumbent upon them to have the proper resources in order to fulfill their contractual obligations with us. It shouldn't be upon us to figure out how to solve their problems. It just doesn't, if it's our staff and we're trying to deal with more kilometers that our staff have to do, and that they can't work for whatever the issues are, it's our responsibility to figure those out. But when we have a contract with someone, that's what we pay for. This is within the contract. These are the obligations that you have to find. It's not incumbent upon us to figure out, solutions to their problems. And I feel like that's kind of what we're doing here. Is that what we're doing here?
So historically, the town has set the service routes. So those are routes that we have provided with the length of kilometers. So when they bid on the contract, they are bidding on X number of routes at X number of kilometers. So that kind of is the issue here, because we haven't increased the budget to increase the number of routes to allow them to meet the service level.
Councilor.
Okay. Well, obviously we should. I mean, if
Councilor, do you CEO wants to
sure,
maybe you can help clear. He's pointing to me, so I'll let him clarify.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think another component also is that the original contract would have only provided for so much equipment that they'd be expected to provide. So when we require more equipment, we would generally pay more for that service as well. So there is a equipment component that would have to be factored in as well as we take on more subdivisions. If we want to keep the number of kilometers per route down to the same, we have to add the equipment, and that wouldn't have been in the original contract.
okay, I don't know how the contracts are established, whether those details are part of it. That's fine. I just that's what it is. That's what it is.
Councilor Gardner, second time.
I think I'm okay with this, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? I'll vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 14.2, right? That's where we're at. Bike share feasibility study. You pulled this one. Did you want to move the recommendation? No? Someone want to move the recommendation? Councilor Thompson, seconder. Councilor Reese, thank you. Councilor Gardner, you want to speak to it? Go ahead.
I don't know how my name appeared there, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just don't think we're ready for this. I don't think the town's ready for this.
Okay.
I may change my mind when we get to council, but.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? All vote. All those in favor? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 14.3. This is the request for increased capital budget authority for capital project. The design of active transportation facilities, Yonge Street, Bloomington Road to Rail Bridge. Councilor Gardner, you pulled this one. Did you want to move the recommendation? Does someone want to move the recommendation? Councilor Thompson, thank you. Seconder. Councilor Kent, thank you. Councilor Gardner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very familiar with this area, and I won't say never, but it's so rare to see somebody walking or bicycling. Now, maybe that's because we don't have the active transportation in place, infrastructure in place, but I think this money can be better spent somewhere else. So I'll vote against it.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? See none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 14.4, Heritage Permit Application, 23 March Street. Councilor Gardner, you pulled this one. Did you want to move it? Someone, thank you. Councilor Reese moves it. Seconder, Councilor Gallo, thank you. Do you want to speak to it? Go ahead, Councilor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I am in favor of this, but I do have a concern. This heritage area was very hard won and is very, very important to the residents. So in this case, this is a rear garden suite, although I do believe they are also allowed on the side. So I would like to ask Mr. Serio her advice. I wouldn't like this to be, because this is perfect in the sense that it won't change the streetscape, which is required in the Heritage District. But how do we keep this from perhaps becoming a precedent until we get our garden suite bylaw going? Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Serio.
Mr. Serio?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the province has passed Bill 23, which now allows additional residential units, which include the garden suites as of right. By any garden suite located in a heritage conservation district would still be required to meet the guidelines of the Heritage Conservation District Plan and would still be required to go through the town's heritage permit process.
Councillor?
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, a follow-up. So as it is the streetscape that is so important in the Heritage District, that would mean that, well, in effect, it would mean that you wouldn't be able to do a side garden apartment because that would change the heritage streetscape.
Mr. Serio, or do you want me to go?
I'm
Mr.
sorry
Ramuno
if
on that, Mr. Ramuno?
So you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Gardner. So correct, our Northeast Heritage Conservation District does have policies with respect to managing redevelopment in the area, and to ensure any redevelopment is complementary to the area and the policies in the plan. It's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. I mean, that area does have some large, deep lots where there is the opportunity for the additional residential units being garden suites. The zoning in the area, also the R7 zoning, also does allow additional residential units. It really depends. I mean, the only opportunities for the garden suites are going to be really in the rear yard, but there are situations where there are corner flankage yards where there may be an opportunity to situate a garden suite. We would just have to review that application based on the Heritage Conservation District plan and policies with respect to the architecture and how it is complementary, how it would be complementary to the area in the plan. So it's something that we would have to review on a case-by-case basis.
Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Bruno, and through you to Mr. Serio. I took that to be the meaning from what you said, that it would have to go through the heritage process, the committee, and then to council, and meet all of the guidelines of the Heritage District. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this one? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. 14.6, request for non-standard procurement approval for capital project, Aurora Promenade Street Gate detailed design. Councilor Gardner, you pulled this one. Did you want to move the recommendation? Someone want to move the recommendation? Councilor Kim, seconder. Councilor Weiss, thank you. Any comments, questions? Oh, Councilor Thompson.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Ramuno. Mr. Ramuno, just so I understand the process, we went out for a tender, nobody bid. That's why it's before us, because essentially we're looking to sole source it to SEMA Plus. But at the same time, we also speak in the report that we've rolled 3 of the capital projects into one. The streetlight improvements from Yonge Street to from Wellington to Church, the Temperance Street parking lot, as well as the streetscape design. So when we went out to tender, were we seeking somebody for all 3 of those capital projects, or was it just for the streetscape design?
Mr. Ramuno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Thompson. No, the RFP incorporated all those 3 components. So yeah, that RFP did capture all the work, the street lighting improvements, the furniture, the Temperance Street staircase, design for future construction program and the actual streetscape component. These historically, this Promenade streetscape design goes back to 2013, and it was always intended to be a multi-year capital project. And the amounts identified here are somewhat dated because they were prepared a number of years ago. But rest assured, the RFP, the design concept factors in the total design of the streetscape, the infrastructure, the street design, traffic component, traffic study component. But we will have to come back once that design is completed for additional council consideration regarding the budget moving forward for those for the capital construction project.
Councilor?
Thank you. And you've kind of answered, but just to go over again, because that's why I was asking, is because table 1 said that the initial budget amounts for those 3 projects, when added up together, were $1.2 million. You're now asking for authority to approve the amount of $578,927. So, that's practically half of what the budget of those 3 projects were. So I understand that you said that there may be construction costs going forward, but are we not still saving from a budget perspective the 1.2 that was previously identified in the costing to what we're actually now spending of the 600,000? Or not?
Mr. Romero?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and sorry about that. I should clarify that a couple of those capital projects, for instance, the first one, the streetlight improvements, that 600,000 estimate, that was actually to cover the design and the construction, the implementation of those new streetlights. This Temperance Street parking lot staircase replacement, that included design, but the actual construction costs of doing the actual new staircase. The last one, the streetscape design, that was strictly the design component of that plan. So again, it's the actual design here were just under 600,000. Those are dated estimates, but a couple of those projects included the actual construction components like the streetlights and the staircase.
We had so many reports tonight that asked for increased spending. I was actually getting excited that we might have saved some money, but okay.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. New business. Councilor Weiss.
Last council, we had before us the town park upgrading. And we also had a delegate, Allison Hughes, who came forward to make a recommendation for a fully accessible swing. And I noticed after the fact that, or I wasn't sure whether the $33,000 that was allocated for that actually made it into the motion. So what I'd like to do is, if the chair allows me to do that, is to create a motion to include that $33,000 for that accessible swing, because the council at that time felt that was an improvement and it was worth the expenditure. So I'd like to move that, if I may. Do you, Mayor?
So, and I'll take the seconder, and I just want to give an explanation, because normally I would consider this to be substantive, and I wouldn't approve it at this time, but we did have considerable discussion as a council, and so therefore I'm going to allow it at this time, because I don't think that anyone here needs time to consider, because we had that discussion. Okay, is that?
Yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
That's fair for
yeah.
say?
And
Okay.
so
Yep, go ahead.
I have a draft, but I think the clerk knows about it. That the total budget authority for project number AM 0356 playground replacement, fully accessible town park, be increased to $565,000, representing an increase of $33,000 to facilitate the installation of an accessible swing, and 2, that the increase be funded from the Parks and Recreation Asset Management Reserve. And they say AI doesn't work.
Thank you. Yeah. And I got a seconder. Any other comments or questions to this? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries.
Thank you, council.
Any other new business?
None.
None? Councillor Gardner, new business?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, re 65 St. John's Side Road. I oppose the confidential closed session direction, as I didn't think it was the right way to proceed for the marsh. It was very clear from what the delegate said and the public planning meeting that we all agreed that it was not good planning, that application was not good planning, but also considering the comments that it was not acceptable to put the marsh under any risk. I would like to propose, as the delegate suggested, I would support you using your strong mayor power to ensure protection of the marsh.
I appreciate that. I don't believe that strong mayor powers allow for overturning of a tribunal.
Thank you, but through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Seria. Well, I was wondering about that, but we've just gone into the first CMC, and we haven't really progressed in the tribunal process. So could it be possible?
Mr. Seria?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, first it is before the tribunal, so therefore it is outside of the strong mayor's powers. But secondly, one of the reasons is if it interferes with a provincial priority. Provincial priority is listed in the regulations, and environment is not one of the provincial priorities.
Councillor?
I don't really know how to respond to that. So we decided was bad planning. Even though it was housing, it was bad planning. We're powerless. Okay, you don't have to answer.
I would argue we have powers as a council to say no, if we agree on that. Is that all?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh. New business? You got public service announcement. I'll come back to you. New business? New business? Councilor? Yeah, go ahead.
Just a question on the eastern side of Queen's Diamond Jubilee Park. There is a water fountain thing there that I don't believe has been functioning for probably since it was originally installed, notwithstanding me asking in previous years to get it functioning. Could someone please take a look at it and can even walk me through it and show me how it actually works? Because
We'll get you a key, Councilor. Turn it on.
so I can tell the community, because water has never come out of that.
I see nodding of the head, so Ms. Steenkamp will get back to you on that one. Thank you. Anything else, Councilor? No. Councilor Kim, new business? No. Public service announcement. Councilor Kim? Councilor Gallo? Councilor Thompson? Public service.
Big thank you to all the staff and Shelley Ware and her team for all the hard work yesterday for Canada Day.
Thank you. It was a fun day. Councilor Gardner?
I would also like to thank staff for, particular, of course, Ms. Ware, for all of the, for the parade, the dance in the park, which is where I actually danced. And
well, as I said that night, it was cold, but that's federal government's fault. That's not our fault. So,
but it was a very successful celebration of Canada Day. And my only request is that next year, if there is a float, that it have some sort of railings, so that when it does its starts, it can feel a little more secure in that. Thank you.
So, Councilor Reese, PSA, nothing. Just a few. I'll echo the sentiments about Canada Day. It was a phenomenal day. We're better to spend Canada Day than in Canada's birthday town right here in Aurora. So kudos to everybody, staff, Shelley, for all the work that they did. I talked to many residents and they loved everything all the way up to the fireworks. So great job. This Wednesday, actually tomorrow, Concerts in the Park is back. That's right. So, we're excited for that kickoff, right? 7 p.m. And there's going to be food. Actually, it's from 6 p.m. because the vendors open up from 6 p.m. So there'll be some vendors there with some food, lots of things to do. Bring your chairs, get ready for a great concert. It's going to be an incredible time. And if you see the lineup, you can always visit aurora.ca/summer concerts. I think we got an extraordinary lineup this year. So I'm really excited about every Wednesday night. Trying to see, get active with your family this summer. Join Cycle Aurora from July 1st to September 1st for weekly bike challenges. Explore our beautiful town on 2 wheels and have the chance to win great prizes and gift cards. Wow. To register, visit aurora.ca/cycle aurora. And save the date, Aurora Town Square grand opening this fall. It's taking place from September 20th to October 13th. This celebration will feature a variety of indoor and outdoor entertainment, including hands-on workshops, exclusive previews from partners, and captivating performances. The grand opening will feature unique experiences and vibrant cultural offerings, highlighting the venue's state-of-the-art design. And full details and ticket sales will be announced later this summer at auroratownsquare.ca. And also, if you want to host your next event at Aurora Town Square, whether it's a community event or a private celebration, it's a perfect place to have as a backdrop. So bring your event to life. And at Aurora's newest venue in the heart of downtown, rentals are available starting October 15th, and you can reserve your space and be among the first to host your event at Aurora Town Square at aurora.ca/ATS bookings. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Gardner, Councillor Weiss, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. We are adjourned.